Has Oscar Piastri really just sent a message that could expose McLaren? Or are we facing one of the most intelligent and dangerous criticisms we have seen in recent Formula One? Because what happened at the Chinese Grand Prix was not just another abandonment, it was the point where everything started to make noise within the team, where Piastri's words, apparently calm, hide something much more serious. Real doubts about McLaren's preparation, reliability, and immediate future in this new era. And the most worrying thing is not what he said, but what he let on. Because when a driver like Piastri starts to hint that these failures are not a surprise, the question is no longer what went wrong in China. The question is, what is really happening inside McLaren? The story begins in China, but not at the moment of abandonment, but long before, in a context that was already loaded with signs that few were interpreting correctly. McLaren arrived as one of the strong teams after what was previously shown, with a competitive car and a solid duo formed by Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, but also with enormous pressure to confirm that what happened the previous year had not been a coincidence. And in that scenario, Piastri was called to take a step forward, to consolidate himself as a key piece within a project that aspired to everything. From the beginning of the weekend, it was already clear that something was not quite right. The performance was there, the car responded, but there was a strange sensation in the air, a kind of invisible fragility that was not reflected in the times, but in the way in which the team worked against the clock to understand certain behaviors. Still, when the lights went out, Piastri did exactly what was expected of him. An impeccable start, controlling the race from the start and showing that he had the pace to lead and manage the situation with authority. Everything seemed under control, until it wasn't. Because in a matter of moments, that entire competitive scene completely collapsed. It wasn't a driver error, it wasn't a bad strategy, it wasn't a battle on the track. It was something much more worrying. A technical failure that left him out, an electrical problem in the power unit that simply ended his race early. And that's where this story really begins. What makes this moment so important is not just the abandonment itself, but what it represents. We are not talking about an isolated race, a specific incident that can be filed as bad luck. We are talking about a pattern that is beginning to repeat itself, about a start to the season where Piastri has practically not been able to compete under normal conditions. And for a driver who needs to understand the car and build his season from the ground up, this is devastating. While the rest of the grid accumulates data, evolves and adapts, he is forced to observe from the sidelines, to analyze without being able to act, to remain trapped in a passive role that not only slows down his performance, but also the development of the team itself. Every lap you don't take, every stint you don't complete is lost information. And in such a tight Formula One, that makes enormous differences. And it is in that context where his words begin to take on a completely different weight. Because when Piastri speaks about what happened, he does not do so with uncontrolled rage or with inflammatory statements. Quite the opposite. His tone is cold, measured, even correct. He talks about something unfortunate, a disappointing situation, a problem whose origin is not yet entirely clear, but he immediately introduces a nuance that changes everything. He lets it be known that this type of failure is not exactly unexpected. And there is the turning point. Because in Formula One, saying that something doesn't surprise you is much stronger than openly complaining. It means that, in some way, you already knew this could happen. That the problem does not originate in China, but much earlier. That there is something at the base of the project that is not solid enough. And without saying it directly, Piastri puts a huge doubt on the table. Did McLaren really come into this season prepared? That is the true beginning of the conflict, the moment when it stops being a simple abandonment and becomes a warning sign. A signal that, although expressed calmly, begins to generate silent pressure within the team. Because when a pilot begins to understand and imply that the problems are structural and not circumstantial, the narrative changes completely. And the most disturbing thing is that this has only just begun. Piastri's retirement did not end when his car shut down. In fact, it was right there where the real problem for McLaren began. Because while from the outside it might have seemed like just another mechanical failure and a complicated start to the season, inside the paddock the reading was completely different. And this is where the story escalates. Because in Formula One it's not just what happens on the track that matters, how it is interpreted matters. And Piastri's words, as measured as they were seemingly harmless, began to generate noise. Not because of what it said directly, but because of what it implied. When a pilot claims that the problems are not a surprise, he is pointing to something much deeper, a lack of confidence in the technical basis of the project. And that, within a team that has come from fighting for everything, is dynamite. From that moment on, the narrative changes completely. It is no longer just about abandonment in China. We are beginning to talk about a pattern. Australia had been chaotic, China confirms it is not an isolated case, and suddenly McLaren goes from a solid team to one under suspicion. Because if the car has pace but lacks reliability, the problem is much more serious than it seems. And here comes a key point that increases the tension even more: the time factor. We are at the beginning of a season where every session counts, where every kilometer is essential to understand a completely new car, with demanding regulations and very tight margins. While other teams accumulate data, optimize settings and correct errors, McLaren loses one of its main tools: real information on the track. And Piastri knows it. That's why your frustration is not just emotional, it's strategic. Because each lap that is not completed not only affects their individual performance, but also the overall development of the team. He himself lets it be known when he talks about the need to learn even by watching the race, a phrase that, translated, is devastating. It means that they are not where they should be, that they are reacting instead of controlling the situation. And at that point, the internal pressure begins to grow. Not only about the engineers, not only about the technical department, but about the entire structure. Because when a young, methodical, and normally restrained driver starts leaving these types of messages, the team understands that there is a limit, and that he is getting dangerously close. In addition, there is another element that makes all of this even more delicate: the relationship with the power unit supplier. Because this type of failure is not isolated to the chassis, it directly involves the complete package, the joint work, the integration of systems. And that opens another front of pressure that is not always seen from the outside, but that within the team can generate significant tensions. So what seemed like a simple abandonment turns into something much bigger. It becomes a collective doubt, in a crack that begins to open within a project that, on paper, should have been solid. And the most dangerous thing of all is that this crack does not come from a visible error, but from something more difficult to solve: the feeling that the problem is at the base. And when that feeling appears, it doesn't go away easily. Because when a driver like Oscar Piastri reaches this point, when he no longer only talks about bad luck, but rather hints at failures that were foreseeable, the conversation completely changes level. It's no longer about fixing a car, it's about regaining confidence. And in Formula One, that is much more difficult. The most worrying thing for McLaren is that Piastri is not just any driver. He is not impulsive, he is not one to make controversial statements, he is not someone who generates noise for no reason. Quite the opposite. He is cold, analytical, and extremely precise with what he says. And precisely for this reason, when he sends a message like this, within the team it is not interpreted as momentary frustration. It is interpreted as a serious signal. Because what he is putting on the table, without saying it outright, is an uncomfortable question. Can you really trust the project? And this is where the situation becomes critical. Because if a driver begins to feel that the car is not reliable, that the development has cracks, and that the problems come from the base, he automatically changes his way of seeing the future. He no longer only thinks about the next race, he starts to think about his career, in his position within the team, in the opportunities you may be missing while others move on. And this is what turns everything into a silent bomb. McLaren isn't just losing points, it's risking something much more valuable: the long-term stability of one of its key drivers. Because while Norris adds, competes, and stays in the fight, Piastri is getting trapped in a start to the season that does not depend on his performance. And that inequality, even if it is not said publicly, weighs. Plus, there's an even more profound effect: built-up pressure. Because each new failure, each lost session, each opportunity that slips away, not only affects the present, it builds a narrative. And in Formula One, narratives matter. They define decisions, movements, and futures. And right now, the narrative that is beginning to form around McLaren is not that of a dominant team, but that of a team with internal doubts. And if that is not corrected quickly, the consequences can be much greater than it seems. Because the real danger is not abandonment in China. The real danger is that this abandonment has uncovered something that was already there. A weakness that is now visible. A doubt that can no longer be ignored. And a pilot who, for the first time, begins to make it clear, even silently, that something is not right. And in the end, what happened to Oscar Piastri at the Chinese Grand Prix cannot be summarized as simply another abandonment. Because what he left behind was not only a lost result, but a feeling that is now beginning to weigh on McLaren. Because when you analyze everything together, you understand that there was no media explosion here, there were no screams or out-of-control statements. There was something much more dangerous. Cold, calculated criticism backed by facts. A driver who, without pointing out directly, made it clear that these problems are not a coincidence, that they are part of something deeper, something that the team has not yet managed to solve. And that's what really changes everything. Because from now on, each failure will no longer be seen as an isolated incident, it will be interpreted as part of a pattern. Each problem will reinforce the doubt that has already been planted. And each race in which McLaren does not respond will make that silent bomb that Piastri launched grow even more. The big question is no longer what happened in China. The big question is whether McLaren is really in control of the situation or whether it is reacting to problems coming from the bottom up. And in the midst of all this, there remains a key factor: time. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.